We are on page Yudzayin Amud Bet. If you're following in the art scroll, we are on 17B B1. 17B1. Okay, got it? Everyone's found it? Okay. Let's go. Metvei. So just we got to back up a little bit so we understand exactly what it is that we're describing, that we're speaking about. Okay? We're going to back up about one or two lines to the words of Rav Ashi. Okay? The Gemara says as follows. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi teaches, Shtu yayin mechale avodah, shtu yayin, people who, Kohanim that come to the work, to the Bet HaMikdash, and they're serving in the Bet HaMikdash drunk, they're sacrificing a korban in the holiest place on earth, and they're literally coming drunk. Well, what's the halacha? They invalidate the service, right? Gazru baher rabanan, so they ruin the service by drinking wine. Gazru bahu rabanan. Piru rosh lo mechale avodah, lo gazru rabanan. Okay? So the Gemara actually explained that there's a difference between a Kohen who it's his turn to serve, or his group's turn to serve in Bet HaMikdash. And we talked about whether or not you're allowed to drink, you're not allowed to drink wine, at what stage. Let's say your larger group is on, but it's not your day today. So the halacha is, we talked about how you're allowed to drink before, but not allowed to drink after, or allowed to drink before, after, but not before. And each one we gave its reasoning. And the Gemara in the end asked, why should there be a difference between a Kohen cutting his hair, if it's his turn to serve in the Avodah, and a Kohen who's getting drunk on the Avodah? In both cases, the Torah says that you're not allowed to have, a Kohen can't have a long hair. He needs to cut his hair. How long? We learned about last time. How long can he go? How long does a king have to go? King gets a haircut every day. Kohen Gadol gets a haircut once a week. A Kohen Hedyot can't go more than 30 days without cutting his hair. Okay? So the Gemara asks, so what's the difference between wine and hair cutting? Yeah?
30 days, which means that when there is a Omer. Yeah, what about the Omer?
So,
There
wasn't Omer. It wasn't Omer. It was after the Bet HaMikdash. Okay? So, the Gemara now says,
Akiva was after the fact.
the laws of the Omer was there before. Counting Omer was there before. It's from the Torah, but the laws of not cutting your hair, that comes much later. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So the Gemara now asks, one second, hold on. You're telling me now that it turns out that you're telling me that the Kohen, if he was to serve with drunk, then he would ruin the service. The service itself would be pasul. So therefore, since it's so strict that it ruins the service, so therefore we made a gezerah, a rule about wine. But we did not make the same rule about cutting hair even nowadays. That's what the Gemara is talking about. Because if they would have, in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, served with the hair that was long, unkempt, they came to the Bet HaMikdash and they served in that way. So the law was that it would not have invalidated the service. They're not allowed to do it. They'll get punished for it, but they don't ruin the thing that they've sacrificed. Okay? Whereas shtu yayin, if let's say you bring a korban and I'm your kohen and I come and I'm completely drunk and I do your korban is invalidated because of my actions, because it was not brought by a kohen that was corpus mentis. Okay? The Gemara now asks on this concept that if a kohen has long hair, overgrown.
For the long hair,
yeah.
The korban is invalidated or not?
No. It's only for the wine.
Yeah. Because it's not like in full conscience.
And the Gemara is actually going to ask a question, how do we know one, not the other? And that's what we're up to now. The Gemara asks a question. Mitveh, we learned in a Braita. These are the Kohanim that are liable to have the death penalty when they are doing the Avodah in the Bet HaMikdash, when they're not doing it correctly. Okay? A Kohen doesn't get the death penalty for not doing the service. You don't want to do the service, don't do the service. But you can't come to the holiest place. If there was, in the olden days, if you were one of the guards of the king, and you showed up to work drunk, they'd execute you. You want to stay home. But you're here in the holiest place. It needs to be treated with the proper respect.
Does that apply to davening as well?
Not in the same realm. So yes, in terms of the idea, but we wouldn't say that someone who prayed when they were still drunk gets the death penalty. Okay? Because Bet HaMikdash is orders of
Held to another
magnitude,
standard.
higher. Correct. Okay. So the Gemara says, which kohanim? Shtuye yain, ones that are drunk, ufruei rosh, and ones that they've come unkempt with long hair. They're ungroomed. Bishlema, the Gemara asks, 1 second. Bishlema shtuye yain. I understand when it comes to a kohen that serves as drunk, we get it. Because behedya ketiv behu, it says it in the pasuk specifically, yain v'shechar al tesh, do not drink wine or intoxicating beverages. Okay? And then the pasuk ends at the end, it says v'lo yamutu, and you shall not die. Indicating that if you weren't careful, then the opposite, then you might. Okay? That you will have that punishment. Ela pruei rosh minalan.
Can this be referring to Nadav and Avihu?
This is where it's mentioned with regards to the aftermath of Nadav and Avihu. And that's one of the reasons it says that they died. Because they approached after the celebrations of the inauguration of the temple, and they came from the meal with still drunk from the effects of the Seudah.
I thought it was the incense. They brought in the wrong incense.
There's 6 reasons that are brought. One of them is that they brought the incense into the Kodesh HaKodashim, which is only supposed to be done by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So that's another one of the 6 reasons. Excellent. Okay. So the Gemara says, I understand if you tell me that there's a death penalty involved, because when it comes to Shtuya Yain, it says it explicitly in the pasuk that we just mentioned. Yain v'shechar al tesh, and it says, V'lo tamutu. Al ela pruei rosh minalan. How do you know the halacha that pruei rosh, if you have long hair, that there's a death, where the person has a death penalty? The Gemara, where do we learn it from? The Gemara answers, the Braita says, Dichtiv v'rosham lo yigalechu, and their hair they shall not cut, ufera lo yishalechu, and they should not let their hair grow long. Okay? Uchtiv batre, and it says after that, v'yayin lo yishtu kol kohen bevo'am el chatzer penimit, and wine they shall not drink when they come into the inner sanctum of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, where are these verses mentioned? These verses are mentioned in Yechezkel, which is one of the prophets, one of the 24 books of the Tanakh, but it's not in the Torah. Okay? So the Gemara says, if from the fact that we put one right next to the other, we're meant to draw some sort of a comparison. The itkush, and we juxtapose piruei rosh l'shtuya yain, those with elongated hair to those that come drunk. Mashtuya yain b'mita, just like we learned that shtuya yain, if you're drunk b'mita, also af piruei rosh b'mita, also someone who comes in unkempt and to do the service, also they have the same death penalty. So we see that the Torah, in Tanakh, in the pasuk in Yechezkel, we put those two together, seemingly indicating the fact that they are related. Gemara continues. Umina, says the Gemara, 1 second. If you just told me that drinking wine and growing long hair are put together, meaning that they're one and the same, that they're comparable, so how could we say that drinking wine invalidates the service, and pruei rosh the mechale avodah? So too long hair should also. So if you learned a comparison for one thing, why would you not learn a comparison for another? Now it's interesting, the Gemara doesn't actually ask it this way, but in other places the Gemara says, en hekesh lemechetza, which means that you can't have a hekesh, a juxtaposition, a closeness, lemechza, halfway. So as an example, let's say I said, the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov are the same. Why? Because it says, et Shabbatotai ve'et Yom Tovai tishmeru. Let's say example. It says, guard my Shabbat and my Yom Tov. That means that the pasuk is telling you that you have to guard them the same. Imagine the Gemara would say, and that means you can't do X on Yom Tov, just like on Shabbat. The Gemara would say, what do you mean? What about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, P that you can't do on Shabbat? You should also not be allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Oh, that's not talking about that.
Just because they're juxtaposed doesn't mean that they're the same.
If you're saying, with regards to Tishmeru, guarding them, keeping them, and in that it was Hekesh, we say En Hekesh Lemechza. You can't do it halfway.
So it's all or nothing.
It would seemingly be all or nothing. And the Gemara is basically asking that as a question. If you put them together, it seems that you're saying that they're the same. And if they're the same, then the halacha should be, if one gets a death penalty, one gets a death penalty. So also, if one invalidates the service, other one invalidates the service. Yep. Gemara answers, okay. So from that, we are now knocking out the opinion of Rav Ashi, that Rav Ashi said that if you have long hair, it doesn't invalidate the service, and therefore the law would be different with regards to a Kohen in our day, in our time, growing long hair or drinking wine in the time when his family was supposed to be serving, assuming he knew that date. Okay? Mm-hmm. The Gemara says, no, it's not a valid question. Ki itkush lemitahu di itkush. When did we compare it? We compared it with regards to the isura, to the punishment of death. We never compared it with regards to the idea of making the avodah be profaned or being invalidated. The Gemara says, 1 second, hold on, I don't understand. So if you're telling me that you only have it, you're going to use it only for the death penalty, to learn that out, and not the other thing. So then maybe let's ask a question on that thing too. Amale Ravina le Ravashi, hamikame da'ata Yecheskel manamara. Now, just let's be aware of the chronology of Tanakh. The Torah is written, okay? When is the Torah given to the Jewish people? It's given to the Jewish people in the desert, in the year 2448, okay? The Jewish people travel in the desert for 40 more years, basically, until 2488. They get into Eretz Israel. For roughly 500 years, they have a different Mishkan, a roving, mobile temple, okay? A sanctuary. Eventually, Shiloh, it goes to other places as well, okay? After that, eventually, David HaMelech says, 1 second, I'm a king in the Jewish people. I have a palace, but God doesn't have a palace? Impossible. I'm not going to sleep in my own bed until I find and create a home for God. David HaMelech purchases the spot of the Beit HaMikdash, but God says to King David, you cannot build the Beit HaMikdash. Your hands have too much blood on them, because David fought many wars in order to be able to save the Jewish people. And even though it was to save the Jewish people, God said, the house of the Beit HaMikdash is a house of peace, not a house of a warrior. Your son is going to be the one that's going to build it. Okay, but David HaMelech, it's called the house of David. Harachman Yakim Sukat David HaNofelet. Why? Because David HaMelech was the one that initiated it. Shlomo HaMelech then completes the Beit HaMikdash.
Didn't he also get all of the wood and he basically got all of the resources? He started saving.
He prepared the ground with Chiram. He did lots of things in order to get the job done, but he wasn't allowed to even begin building it. Okay? So Shlomo HaMelech now builds a Beit HaMikdash. That Beit HaMikdash lasts for 400 years.
So what year is that?
410 years, sorry?
So what year are we now? 3,000? 3,3, I think.
Yeah, roughly 3.3, let's say. Okay? Again, not exactly, but I'm just giving you a rough. Yeah.
What's the question? It's the initiation of the first Beit is coming from David's mind, or it's from a request from a dream, or is Navi and...
From David. Yeah. But remember, the Pasuk is peppered with references to the fact that God says, the place where I'm going to rest my name, indicating that there was going to be a set place. But God doesn't tell David that you must do this. Okay? Now, this is amazing. Ready for this? So 410 years. So how long are we now after the receiving of the Torah? Almost 1,000 years. And I'm rounding off the numbers. It's less than that, but let's say it's roughly. Okay? Then the Gemara, at that stage, at the end of the first Beit HaMikdash, where are we up to? Which Nevi'im are we up to? Right? We're up to the Nevi'im that talk about Yirmiyahu is at that stage. He's the one, Yirmiyahu, Echa, when we read about the Jewish people being driven into exile, that's Yirmiyahu, okay? Now, Yecheskel precedes Yirmiyahu, okay? But not by much. So the Gemara says, 1 second, you're telling me that the law is, if a Kohen walks into the sanctuary, does the avodah, drunk, then he gets a death penalty. And you're telling me that the source for that law, the origin source, is a verse in Yecheskel. Before Yecheskel, and from the time the Torah was given until the time of Yecheskel, is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So if we didn't know that law until then, would he just make it up? So you're telling me now, post facto, that we learn it from Yecheskel. But where did Yecheskel know it from? That cannot be the source.
Yecheskel was before the temple or after?
Yecheskel is towards the end of the first temple. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that the law would have had no origin source. How did we know what the law was, and what did we do if a Kohen came in Shtuya Yayin? Okay? Gemara says as follows. Amalei. Rav Ashi said to him, Uletaimech, and according to your reasoning. So you're saying that doesn't make sense, that you can't have a Torah law being sourced in a later source. Because then, what did they do from the time of the giving of the Torah until that source was revealed? Okay? Gemara answers. So Rav Ashi answered him back. He says, Ulitaimech, and according to your opinion, Hada Amar Rav Chizda, there's a famous saying in the name of Rav Chizda. That Rav Chizda said, Davar ze mitorat Moshe lo lamadnu. Rav Chizda learned a law with regards to a Kohen that did not get a Brit Milah. Is a Kohen who does not have a Brit Milah allowed to serve in the temple? Now, what's the possibility of a Kohen who doesn't have a Brit Milah serving in the temple? He's obviously, you have to be religious enough that you have a Brit.
No, maybe
He
you
was born without it.
already have it.
Even if you're born by birth,
You do a small-
you have to do something which constitutes the law. They do what's called hatafat dam brit. They make the tiniest of incisions and they take the blood of the circumcision. So they don't do the full brit because that's already done. You can have a person who's born circumcised. That happens even today. Okay, it's rare, but it happens. They do what's called hatafat dam brit. So they still do something. So that Kohen would also be considered. So we're asking, what's the halacha if a Kohen who's uncircumcised does that avodah? Now, what's the scenario? One scenario might be a Kohen is like, forget this, I don't want to do Brit Milah. Runs onto the stadium, streaker, he's in his underwear. He runs in, he does the sacrifice. Did he ruin it? Yes or no? What's the halacha?
And
Okay.
then he wants to do his turn.
I'm just giving an example. But there's also examples that are much more relevant. The Gemara talks about a case where a baby is born, and they do Brit Milah on the baby, and Bar Minan, the baby dies. The kid has a second brother, they do Brit Milah, the baby dies.
Right.
After two babies have died from Brit Milah, we don't do Brit Milah on the third one. And that's the halacha, and he's not allowed to get a Brit Milah.
Wow.
Okay? So here you have a scenario, a Kohen, who might be forbidden for him to have but the guy's the big Torah scholar, he never did a sin in his life, he's one in a million. But what would be the halacha? A Kohen that does not have a milah. So Rav Chizda says, this law, okay, that a Kohen that's uncircumcised, that does not get a Brit Milah, it doesn't make a difference if it's his fault, not his fault, he wants to, doesn't want to. We learn that his participation, if he does the avodah, it doesn't count. Where do we learn it from? Not from the Torah. You won't find it in the Torah. Where do we learn it from? We learned this from what's called Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah does not mean what people think it means. In the Zohar, from Madonna, Bar Minan. It does not mean that. Divrei Kabbalah was the expression that they used in order to describe all the other books besides for the books of Moshe. So, Yoshua, Shoftim, Melachim, Daniel, Yirmiyahu, Megillat Esther, Megillat Echa, Megillat Ruth. Any of the other 24 books besides for the 5 books of Moshe. Those are called Divrei Kabbalah because they were books that were received. Okay? That's what the word Kabbalah means. They're part of the tradition that was received.
What we call it oral tradition.
No. Oral tradition is something that was never written.
That's this.
That's this. And Mishnah.
Right, yeah, it's before
Not
that.
with
So it's
silver.
before that.
Right.
So it's like
So Mishnah and Gemara, oral tradition, this was actually, it was a sin to write the Gemara, it was a sin to write the Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda and Ravina Rav Ashi, they realized that if they didn't write it, it would be forgotten forever, and they invoked the pasuk, Et la'asot la'Hashem, heferu Toratecha. There are times when a person needs to act for God, heferu Toratecha, and we nullify his Torah. A famous example of this is the story of Esther HaMalka, where Esther tells everyone to fast on Pesach, and she uproots a mitzvah from the Torah of eating matzah and eating maror and drinking wine. And what is her logic? Her logic is Et la'asot la'Hashem heferu Toratecha. Her logic is mutav, better. She yechalel Pesach achat, that we should have one Pesach be transgressed. Ve'al yechalelu Pesachim abeh. We don't intervene here. The Jewish people will be lost forever. So instead of losing one Pesach, we'll lose all of them. Okay?
good try.
So, u'midivrei Kabbalah lamadnu. We learned it from Divrei Kabbalah from Nach. Okay? Where did we learn it from? And he brings the pasuk. The pasuk says, and this pasuk is also in Yechezkel, Kol ben nechar, any foreigner, any stranger, son of a stranger, arel lev, who with an uncircumcised heart, ve'arel basar, an uncircumcised flesh, Lo yavo el mikdashi l'sharateni. Should not come to my temple l'sharateni to serve me. Okay? Now, you see from here that it says anyone that's uncircumcised can come and do service. In Yechezkel, okay?
Who said this one?
Yechezkel writes this.
And then what happened before?
And Rav Chizda learns from that the law that says that an uncircumcised Kohen is not allowed to do service. So Rav Ashi says, whatever you're going to answer for Rav Chizda, answer for me. Because the same question you just asked me, how did I learn it from a verse in Ezekiel and Yechezkel? What did they do up until then? You can ask again on Rav Chizda. How did they know that law? Yeah. What did they do up until then? The answer must be, who taught this before Yechezkel said? Ela Gemara Gamirla. It was one of the laws that had been handed down, dating back from Moshe to at Har Sinai, and maybe an oral law. And Yechezkel came along, and he wrote a verse supporting that law, which was given over orally. So one more time. Yechezkel, from the time of Moshe, the law was a Kohen that's uncircumcised not allowed to serve. How did we know that? Moshe got it at Mount Sinai. It's not written in a verse. It's one of the laws that we learn in the oral tradition. Yechezkel comes along many years later, and he's writing a verse, and he writes in the verse this law that was already well known. It was an already established law, handed down, and he just transcribed it. So you want to know how I know it? I know it from that verse.
It does seem obvious.
Sorry, what?
That an uncircumcised Kohen can't serve.
Yeah, but what about an uncircumcised Kohen that's not his fault? That was where the chidush applies.
That's what.
Yeah, maybe you would say, like in a certain area like that an uncircumcised Kohen, when it's not his fault, is considered as if he's circumcised because he can't do it, or whatever. Okay?
So Rabbi,
Yechezkel,
I thought he wasn't allowed to codify any Gemara at that time.
But that's the point. No, not a Gemara. He's writing the verses of Yechezkel, which is the prophets.
But Yechezkel, no, but I thought that you said that Yechezkel wrote down an oral tradition that was given to Moshe.
No, he referenced this. He didn't write it down, the oral law. What he said was, in almost conversationally, he said, no uncircumcised person is allowed to come and serve me. Okay. It's not written as a law. Right? It's not. It's a pasuk in Nach, but it wasn't written as a law. It was written conversationally. Okay? Now, yeah.
Every prophet wrote his own books.
They wrote the books that they did, but they did it with Ruach HaKodesh. Yes.
Yeah, with the Ruach HaKodesh, but they wrote. So it's like okay. When they got it, they wrote it.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
Yeshua wrote his own book.
Yes.
etc.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Now let's move on. Hachanami. So too here, Gemara Gemirla. We also had this law that we knew, a tradition. Ve'ata Yechezkel v'asmechei akra, and Yechezkel came, and he supported it with his verse. Ki gemiri halacha lemita. So when did he have this law that he learned? He learned it with regards to the death penalty, but he never learned it with regards to the invalidation of service. So your question is, how do I know if they're connected? The answer is, how did he know it to write it in the first place? The answer is he had a tradition. And that tradition was only said with regards to the death penalty. It wasn't said with regards to the invalidation of the service. Okay? Let's carry on. Kol hakatuv. The Mishnah now goes back to something that we covered in the Mishnah. Kol hakatuv Megillatani lo misped. There's, just so we understand, there's something called Megillatani. That's not the same as Masechet Taanit. Masechet Taanit is this book. Okay? Megillatani is a book that they used to have that had in it all of the days of fasting and all the days where you were not allowed to fast. So it was a scroll that they had, and it's referenced many times in Masechet Taanit. No, as far as I know, no. Okay? So the Gemara says, Kol dekatuv Megillat Taanit, anything, but it's referenced. So we have many things from Megillatani that's referenced in the Gemara. Kol hakatuv Megillatani, anything that says in Megillatani, the lo lemisped, that you're not allowed to give a eulogy, okay? Lifanav asur, okay? La'acharav mutar. You're not allowed to the day before that day as well. La'acharav, but the day after that day, you are allowed. And we already explained previously
Why didn't we speak about that?
Okay.
So you get a, now what's the reason? So if you have a day that you're not allowed to say a eulogy, right? What is that? What's the logic there? It's a happy day. We don't want you ruining the happy day with a very sad.
Is the Taanit? No.
Sorry?
It's not the Taanit.
Yeah, a Taanit.
This is eulogy, is Taanit?
No, that's a hesped. Hesped is when they get up after the guy dies,
Okay, yes,
and they say he was so amazing, and they're crying, and they're so crying. So any holiday which says that you're not allowed to give a eulogy, says the Mishnah already. So any of those days, you can't do it also the day before. Why? We don't want you going into the holiday
Being upset.
with depression.
Well, you can't get buried on Yom Tov, right?
Not for now. Yes, but
Okay.
that's not part of this.
Okay.
This is a question of bringing sadness to a happy day, not the laws of actual burial. Okay, so the Gemara says lefanav asur la'acharav mutar. You would be allowed to, you would not be allowed to do the eulogy the day before la'acharav, but afterwards it will be permitted. The Gemara now then goes to the beginning of Megillatani that we just referred to. Tan Rabbanan. The rabbis explained in that Megillatani. Ilen Yomaya. These are days, Ilen Yomai, these are the days, Delolihit Anabahon, that you're not allowed to fast on them. Umiktatahon, Delol Misped Bahon. And some of the days that we list over here as holidays are days that you're not allowed to eulogize on them. Okay? So you see that there's levels. There's a fast day, there's a holiday where you're not allowed to fast on. Then there's a holiday that's even more strict. So in other words, it's even more joyous, that we won't even let you eulogize on that day, okay? So, and some of them, you're not allowed to eulogize. Miresh Yarcha de Nisan, ve'ad Timan Yabe. From the beginning, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan until the 8th day of Nisan, Itkum Timida. The Timida, the Tamid, was stood up, okay? And what does that mean? Delol misped bahon. And you're not allowed to do eulogies on that day, and obviously, definitely not fasting, because fasting is a lower level. Mitmanya be'ad sof mu'ada, from the 8th day of Nisan until the end of the holiday, okay? Itotav hagad shvu'aya, delol misped bahon. Okay? So, from the 8th day until the end of the holiday of Pesach, yeah, and as well,
That's Shavuot.
and as well the day, Itotav Chagad Shvu'aya, right? So until the end of Pesach, right, we have the holiday of Shavuot gets set. So therefore, you're not allowed to eulogize, and also, of course, like we said earlier,
Which means what?
not to fast.
Oh, I
You
understand.
end, you come to the end of Pesach at 7 weeks after?
When do we start counting for Shavuot?
The second day of Pesach.
From the second day of Pesach,
That's
okay?
the difference.
So
Or the second night, rather.
until the end of the holiday of Pesach, right, we're still really setting the holiday of Shavuot. And therefore, from then until then, we also will say that a person is not allowed to eulogize and they're not allowed to
So
fast.
until the 15th.
Sorry?
15th.
Until, yes. Now, one
So
second. now.
between Pesach and Shavuot, it's okay to eulogize?
Sorry?
No.
Between Pesach and Shavuot, like now, in the time
In
period.
the time of the
we're
Omer. Yes.
Yes.
Just from Rosh Chodesh Nisan to the
To
end
the
of
15th.
Pesach.
To the 15th.
to the 15th.
Because
So
it's
when we
beginning to
start
the end of
counting.
Pesach.
Omer.
Oh, to the
Until the end of Pesach.
until the end of the first 2 days.
Yes.
So it's when you start the Omer. Which is
So from the end
Yes,
of
yes, yes.
Now, I want to explain what we discussed until now. So, what does it mean that we set up the Tamid and that we set up Shavuot? So, Rashi explains, and let's look at Rashi for 1 second. Okay, you see Rashi on the side. Miresh Yarcha. It's about 10 lines before the wide lines in Rashi. You got it? Miresh Yarcha de Nisan. Rashi says, Miresh Yarcha de Nisan va'atiman yabe itokam timidad lo misped. Why? Shayu atzedukim omrim yachid mitnadev umevi tamid. Now, the tzedukim were like a group, another group. There were various groups, splinter sects that came from Judaism. So you had Jews that decided they don't believe in the oral Torah. So anything that it says in the Torah, they keep. Anything it says that's not in the Torah, they don't keep.
They were like
How is
Tiffany.
that possible? You need the oral Torah to keep.
That's what we kept trying to tell them. They don't accept it.
Oh, okay.
So the tzedukim, they would wear the tefillin
In between their eyes.
right here. Because it says, Vayul totafot ben einecha,
She's also here.
which is also there, but they would read it literally. Not only that, it says, Lo tevaru esh b'chol moshvotechem. You can't have a fire in all of your dwellings. So how did we learn that? It means you can't light a fire. They held that that meant that you can't, what's it called? That you can't have a fire burning. So if you lit a fire from before Shabbat, there's ways that we could have hot food on Shabbat, right? You light the fire from before Shabbat, you make sure that it's covered with a blech, there's nothing to turn or dial up. So, right? So that's how we hold. The Tzedukim said, no, you're not allowed a fire. So they would eat cold food on Shabbat. In fact, the origin source for chalet and chamin and dafina, right? All these things. How come we all have this food that cooks overnight? It was a way of saying we don't believe like the Tzedukim. We're going to show you by having this food that cooks all throughout Shabbat.
Oh, wow.
Okay? It's just to make the statement.
We consider them like, if there is a minyan, this guy is come.
Apikoros.
Really?
Apikoros means it's heresy. Person who doesn't believe in the entire oral Torah, it's heretical. Okay? It's half of all of the Torah. In fact, almost all of Judaism runs through the oral law. And like you said, it doesn't make sense. There's so many mitzvot in the Torah that the Torah tells you about, but then doesn't tell you what it is. So by tefillin, they could kind of mistakenly say, oh, it means here. But the Torah tells you that you can't eat meat without slaughtering it. And you have to slaughter it like I told you. But then God doesn't tell you how to slaughter it. So what did the Tzedukim do with that pasuk? There's a pasuk saying you have to slaughter it, like I told you, and then it doesn't say how to slaughter it. So these are misguided people, but they believed very strongly, and it was a tremendous fight with the Sadducees, with the Tzedukim, all throughout the time of the Second Temple.
Right?
So and the Pirushim, the Tzedukim, the Baitusim. Sorry,
Torah that we found in Qumran was from them.
the
Torah.
many people say that the Dead Sea Scrolls were came from them. And one of the reasons why they pay any attention to it is because it was actually the written law, which is what they're very strict about.
It's their only book.
Right.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
Where are they now?
Now, most they've died out. Now you have people who've kind of picked up the thread, and decided they want to follow in their ways, but they died out. They disappeared. Okay. Now, all throughout the second temple, the Tzeduki influence was very strong, very strong.
There were a lot to be around the temple.
There was tremendous amount of them at the temple. In fact, one of the major disagreements. Can someone get the door? I think Mike is here. One of the major disagreements between the Tzedukim and the regular Jews, if you will, was over the service on Yom Kippur in the temple. So we learn
The Kohen Gadol part.
exactly. The Kohen Gadol, he would come in with two things in his hands. One of them was the shovel with the coals that he'd taken off the mizbeach, and the other was the pan that held the incense. And the Tzedukim, they would put the incense on before they walked in to Kodesh HaKodashim. And the what we do according to the halakha, the oral Torah, is that you walk in with both, and then you put the incense on the coals inside the Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, what's wild is in the very beginning of Masechet Yuma, they actually would make him swear to us that you're going to put the incense on the thing once you're in the Kodesh HaKodashim.
They make him swear.
They let
Why?
that group, the Kohen.
Why? Because there were Kohanim Gedolim in the second temple that were closet Tzedukim.
What?
That's why
Yes,
they died.
because it was being sold in the second Bet HaMikdash, where the Romans were in control. They were selling the right to be the Kohen Gadol. And the Gemara, the Mishnah actually says, very emotional, it's a very emotive sentence. It says, and then they would separate one from the other after this swearing ceremony. They would separate and cry. They would cry because they were just Choshed, the Kohen Gadol. They just suspected the Kohen Gadol of being a Tzeduki. And he would cry because of the fact that they'd suspected him of being a Tzeduki in his heart of hearts. In fact, the Talmud tells us that there was one Kohen Gadol who served for 80 until his 80th birthday as a Kohen Gadol before he became a Tzeduki at the end, towards the end of his life. Another opinion says he did not become Tzeduki, his children became Tzeduki, but he didn't rebuke them. But different opinions. But it was a tremendous problem during the time of the Second Temple, and there's obviously a very good reason why that was the case. Towards the end of the Second Temple, there was a king, and his name was Yanai, and Yanai went around and wiped out all of the sages. He was angry at them because he was an unfit king. He wasn't from the tribe of Judah. So when it came to go to the Beit HaMikdash, there's only one person that could sit in the Azara, in the courtyard of the temple, and that's a king that comes from the line of King David. So there was a king over Judah, and there was also a king over Israel. There were two Jewish kings almost at war with each other, okay? Sorry, can I ask you to go downstairs and open the door? The guy's here with food. Sorry, just let him in, all right? Now, Yanai went around and murdered every single Jewish sage.
Didn't he also put
Is
One-
that one was except the brother-in-law?
Exactly, Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach's sister was famously Shlom Tzion Hamalka, who was married to Yanai. Okay? So he murdered every sage. And what that means is that the sages that are supposed to be upholding the oral law were practically all dead or in hiding.
Wow.
So you understand why there was a proliferation of Tzeduki influence against the oral law. The only way, at that stage, the oral law wasn't written down. Who told you what the oral law was? Only the rabbis. And they were dead or in hiding.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So the historical context really helps you understand what's going on here. Okay?
What a miracle we have this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So says the Gemara, there's 8 days that we do not eulogize and we don't fast. They are minor holidays. From the first day of Nisan until the 8th day. Why? Because the sages and the Tzedukim had a giant machloket. What was the machloket? The Tzedukim says, Et hakeves ha'echad ta'aseh baboker. Ta'aseh, is that singular or plural?
singular?
Singular. So they said, anyone that wants can donate the Korban Tamid. Any single person can make that donation. That's what it says in the verse. The rabbi said to them, that is true, but you didn't read the next verse. And then it says, right? Ta'asu, the very next verse, what does it say? Take a look. So let's look at Rashi. Shayu atzedukim omrim, yachid mitnadev umevi tamid. Mai darush et hakeves echad taseh baboker, v'et hakeves hasheni taseh ben arbaim. My ahadrule, what did the rabbis answer them back? They answered them back, Et korbani lachmi liishai tishmeru lehakriv li. Tishmeru is singular or plural? Plural. Tishmeru means plural. That means that it is incumbent on the Jewish people as a whole to ensure lehakriv li b'moad, to bring the korban in its proper time. Okay? Lashon rabimu shiu kulam ba'im mitrumat alishka. It therefore comes from the public donations of the people. That money would buy the Korban Tamid. They fought and fought and fought with them, bringing proofs to the Tzedukim from the first day of Nisan. When did they finally manage to convince them? And they accepted on the 8th day of Nisan. So from the 1st until the 8th, the Korban Tamid was at risk. When they finally admitted defeat, the Tzedukim, and they admitted the sages were right, that means that the Korban Tamid was saved. They made those 8 days, the days of the fighting, they made them into, so to speak, a minor holiday. You couldn't fast on those days and you couldn't eulogize. Then the Megillatani continues with the second part. And what happened from the 8th day until the end of Pesach? The end of Pesach was another machloket. Shehayu Baitusin, the Baitusin, which is another sect like the Tzedukim. Omrim, they would say, Atzeret achar Shabbat hu sha'om matchil echad b'Shabbat. Because the Pasuk says, Shneimar, Usfartem lachem mimachorat Shabbat. And you will count for yourselves mimachorat Shabbat. From, what does that mean, mimachorat Shabbat? The day after Shabbat. So they said, when do you start counting the Omer? On Sunday. When do we start counting Omer?
Second night of
Yom
Pesach.
Sheni, Shabbat.
What if it's Tuesday? Doesn't matter. The rabbis explained, Machorat Shabbat. Shabbat is not only a day, Shabbat also references a day of rest. The holiday is a day of rest. You're not allowed to work. Machorat Shabbat here means the day after the day of rest, i.e. the Yom Tov. There are other days. Yom Kippur is also called Shabbat Shabbaton, right? It means rest. It doesn't only mean, it's not only the name of a day. They fought and fought and fought with them. And what that meant was that the holiday of Shavuot, according to the Baitusim, could come out a week later. That it could come out. No, because we're counting second day of the holiday. They're going to count, let's say that day is Monday. They're going to wait until the next Sunday to start the Omer. And then from there they'll count 50 days.
Wow, and then Shavuot is off.
And then Shavuot is off could be off as much as a week.
But I don't understand.
So they fought and fought and fought with the Baitusim until from the 8th day of Nisan, they argued with them until when? Nitfa lahu lahen Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai went to them. The Amar them, he said, Shotim, dibs. Minayin lachem. Where did you get this from? Velo haya adam she'echziro davar chutz mizaken echad. Only one of the elders of the Baitusim answered him. She'aya mitpetpet kinegdo, and he was saying like this against him. Ve'amar Moshe Rabbeinu ohed Yisrael haya. This elder of the Baitusim said, Moshe was a lover of Jews. V'yodea she'atzeret yom echadu, and he knew that atzeret, that Shavuot, was one day. Amad v'tikna achar Shabbat, he let it be after Shabbat, kidei shiyu mitangim shtei yamim, in order that they should have 2 days of celebration. So it should come out on a Sunday, right? So you could celebrate for Shabbat and Sunday. What the heck does that mean? Vidachu otan, and they pushed them off. They were able to explain that they were incorrect. Ve'ahuchu lahem baitusim mikoach ha'pesukin al korchan. The baitusim were forced through the verses themselves to return on their position. V'chazru bahem itkum timida delo l'mispir garsin lo garsin l'tana kidmuch b'samuk l'kana im ken hayir lezer l'tana lekin l'nei d'Rav Yossi. So the Gemara, Rashi explains that therefore the second day, the second expression, second set of days from the 8th day of the holiday until the end of the holiday of Pesach, that was the days that the rabbis were engaged with the Baitusim to save Shavuot. So therefore all of those days also are a minor holiday and they are forbidden. You're forbidden to have fasting and eulogizing on those days. We'll continue from here next week.